The Battle of Rorke's Drift was a battle in the Anglo-Zulu War. Rorke's Drift today is far different to what it was like in 1879. Of the soldiers who survived the battle, 3 of them are buried in Swansea cemeteries. The defence of the mission station of Rorke's Drift was under the command of Lieutenants John Chard of the Royal Engineers and Gonville Bromhead. It came after the British Army's defeat at the Battle of Isandlwana on the 22nd of January 1879. A little over 150 British and colonial troops successfully defended the garrison against an intense assault by 3,000 to 4,000 Zulu warriors. The Zulu attack on Rorke's Drift came very close to defeating the small garrison, but were eventually repelled. 11 Victoria Crosses and 5 Distinguished Conduct Medals were awarded to the defenders. Rorke's Drift, known as Kwa Jimu, Jim's Land in the Zulu language, was a mission station and the former trading post of James Rorke, an Irish merchant. It was located near a drift or ford on the Buffalo Muziyathi River, which at the time formed the border between the British colony of Natal and the Zulu Kingdom. On the 9th of January 1879, the British No. 3 Centre Column under Lord Chelmsford arrived and encamped at the drift. On the 11th of January, the day after the British ultimatum to the Zulus expired, the column crossed the river and encamped on the Zulu bank. A small force consisting of B Company's 2nd Battalion, the 24th of Foot, the 2nd Warwickshire Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead, was detailed to garrison the post, which had been turned into a supply depot and hospital under the overall command of Brevet Major Henry Spalding, 104th Foot, a member of Lord Chelmsford's staff.
About 4:20 p.m, the battle began with Lieutenant Henderson's Natal native horse troopers stationed behind the Osterberg, briefly engaging the vanguard of the main Zulu force. However, tired from the battle at Isandlwana and retreat to Rorke's Drift, as well as being short on carbine ammunition, Henderson's men departed for Help Makar. Henderson himself informed Lieutenant Chard that the enemy was close and that his men would not obey his orders but were going off to help Makar. Henderson then followed his departing men. Upon witnessing the withdrawal of Henderson's Natal native horse troop, Captain Stevenson's Natal native contingent company abandoned the cattle kraal and fled, greatly reducing the strength of the defending garrison. Outraged that Stevenson and some of his colonial non-commissioned officers also fled from the barricades, a few British soldiers fired after them, killing Corporal William Anderson. With the Zulus nearly at the station, the garrison now numbered between 154 and 156 men. Of these, only Bromhead's company could be considered a cohesive unit. Additionally, up to 39 of his company were in the station as hospital patients, although only a handful of these were unable to take up arms. With fewer men, Chard realised and needed to modify the defences, and gave orders that biscuit boxes to be used to construct a wall through the middle of the post in order to make possible the abandonment of the hospital side of the station if the need arose. At 4:30 p.m, the Zulus rounded the Oscarberg and approached the south wall. Private Frederick Hitch, posted as lookout on top of the storehouse, reported a large column of Zulus approaching. The Zulu vanguard, 600 men, attacked the wall south, which joined the hospital and the stonehouse. The British opened fire, and the Zulus were 500 yards, 460 metres away. The majority of the attacking Zulu force swept around the attack to the north wall, while a few took cover and there were others pinned down by continued British fire or retreated to the terraces of the Oscarberg. There they began to harassing fire of their own. As this occurred, another Zulu force swept on to the hospital and northwestern wall. Those British on the barricades included Dalton and Bromhead, were soon engaged in fierce hand-to-hand fighting. The British wall was too high for the Zulus to scale, so they resorted to crouching under the wall, trying to get hold of the defenders' Martini Henry rifles, slashing at British soldiers with assegais or firing their weapons through the wall. At places, they clambered over each other's bodies to drive the British off the wall, but they were driven back. Zulu fire, both from those under the wall and around the Osterberg, inflicted a few casualties, and 5 of the 17 defenders who were killed or mortally wounded in the action were struck while at the north wall. Chard realised that the north wall, under the near constant Zulu attack, could not be held. At 6 p.m, he pulled his men back into the yard, abandoning 2 front rooms of the hospital in the process. The hospital was becoming hard to defend, and the loopholes had become a liability. Rifles poking out were grabbed by the Zulus. Yet if the holes were left empty, the Zulu warriors stuck their own weapons through in order to fire into the rooms. Among the soldiers assigned to the hospital were Corporal William Wilson Allen and Privates Cole, Dunbar, Hitch, Horrigan, John Williams, Joseph Williams, Alfred Henry Hook, Robert Jones, and William Jones. Privates Horrigan, John Williams, Joseph Williams, and other patients tried to hold the hospital entrance with rifles and fixed bayonets. Joseph Williams defended a small window, and 14 dead Zulus were later found beneath that window. It had become clear the front of the building was being taken over by Zulus. John Williams began to hack a way to escape through the wall dividing the central room and the corner room at the back of the hospital. As he made a passable breach, the door into the central room came under furious attack from the Zulus, and he only had one time to drag 2 bedridden patients out before the door gave way. The corner room that John Williams had pulled the 2 patients into was occupied by Private Hook and 9 patients. John Williams hacked at the wall to the next room with his pickaxe as Hook held off the Zulus. A firefight erupted as the Zulus fired through the door and Hook returned fire, but not without an assegai striking his helmet and stunning him. Williams made the hole big enough to get them to the next room, which was occupied only by patient Private Walters, and dragged the patients through. The last man out was Hook, who killed some Zulus who had tried to knock down the door before he dived through the hole. John Williams once again went to work, spurred on by the fact that the roof was now ablaze, as Hook defended the hole and Walters continued to fire through the loophole. After 50 minutes, the hole was large enough to drag the patients through, and the men, apart from Privates Waters and Beckett, who hid in the wardrobe, Waters was wounded and Beckett died of assegai wounds. They were now in the last room, being defended by Privates Robert Jones and William Jones. From here, the patients clambered out through the window and made their way across to the yard to the barricade. Of the 11 patients, 9 survived the trip to the barricade, as did all the able-bodied men. According to James Henry Reynolds, only 4 defenders were killed in the hospital. 1 was a member of the Natal native contingent with a broken leg. Sergeant Max Field and Private Jenkins, who were ill with fever and refused to be moved, were also killed. Reportedly, Jenkins was killed after being seized and stabbed, together with Private Adams. Private Cole, assigned to the hospital, was killed when he ran outside. Another hospital patient killed Trooper Hunter of the Natal Mounted Police. Among the hospital patients who escaped were a Corporal Mayer of the Natal native contingent, Bombardier Lewis of the Royal Artillery and Trooper Green of the Natal Mounted Police, who was wounded in the thigh by a bullet. Private Connolly, with a broken leg, was pulled to safety by hook, although Connolly's leg was broken again in the process. Private Connolly, with a broken leg, was pulled to safety by hook, although Connolly's leg was broken again in the process. As night fell, the Zulu attacks grew stronger. The cattle kraal came under renewed assault and was evacuated by 10 p.m, leaving the remaining men in the small bastion around the storehouse. Throughout the night, the Zulu kept up the constant assault against the British positions. Zulu attacks only began to slacken after midnight, and they finally ended by 2 a.m, being replaced by a constant harassing of Zulu firearms until 4 a.m. By that time, the garrison had suffered 14 dead, 2 others were mortally wounded, and 8 more, including Dalton, were seriously wounded. Almost every man had some kind of wound. They were all exhausted, having fought for the better part of 10 hours and were running low on ammunition. Of 20,000 rounds in reserve at the mission, only 900 rounds were left. As dawn broke, the British could see that the Zulus were gone. All that remained were the dead and severely wounded. At about 7 a.m, an impi of Zulus suddenly appeared, and the British manned their positions again. No attack took place, as the Zulus had been on the move for 6 days prior to the battle and had not eaten properly for 2. In their ranks were hundreds of wounded, and they were several days' march from any supplies. Soon after their appearance, the Zulus left the way they had come.
3 of the men who fought at Rorke's Drift are buried in Swansea. They are 963 Private David Lewis, James Owen of B Company, 2nd Battalion, 24th Regiment. 841 Private David Jenkins, 1st Battalion, 24th Regiment. 906 Private John Connolly, C Company, 2nd Battalion, 24th Regiment. All survived the battle. Private David Lewis was born in Swansea and worked as a tin worker. His name was James Owen, but used the alias David Lewis on joining the British Army. It was not unusual for men to give false names when joining the army. He was posted to 2nd Battalion, the 24th Foot, in 1877. In 1879, when he left the army, an injury assessment board held at the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, confirmed he was suffering from valvular disease of the heart due to being under canvas for months and constantly exposed to climatic vicissitudes. Whilst in the army, he was known to read letters from home to the men who could not read themselves, and to write their replies in what was described as his beautiful handwriting. He died in Swansea, aged 87, in 1938, while living with his son in Kemble Street, Bryn Mill. His grave is in Bethel Cemetery in the city's Sketty area. Private David Jenkins was born in Dyfynnog, near Brecon, in 1846 and enlisted for the town's 25th Brigade at the age of 28, being posted to South Africa in 1874. From 1882 he served with the South Wales Borderers, becoming Lance Corporal the following year. He was responsible for saving the life of Lieutenant John Chard, the commanding officer at Rorke's Drift, by ducking his head down to miss a bullet. Private Jenkins had not been on the original roll as having served at Rorke's Drift, but his family found evidence to say he was there, and his name was then included. He was discharged in 1888 and settled in Swansea, where he became a storekeeper in the city's docks. On a royal visit to Swansea in 1904, he was introduced to King Edward VII. David Jenkins died in 1912 and is buried in Cwmgelli Cemetery, Treborth, Swansea. Last but by no means least is Private John Connolly, born in Castletown, Bearhaven, County Cork, Ireland in 1859. His final resting place is an unmarked pauper's grave at Dannegraig Cemetery, Swansea, Section A, grave 458. Private John Connolly was a patient in the hospital at Rorke's Drift when the battle started, recovering from a dislocated knee caused when he slipped loading a wagon at Tugela River. The accident left him hanging downwards between the outside rails, thus dislocating his knee. Private Hook VC was guarding the hospital and rescued Connolly by dragging him behind him, escaping through a hole made in the hospital wall and then carrying him on his back to safety. Unfortunately for Private Connolly, his knee was again dislocated in the process. Private Hook said, "Watching my chance, I dashed from the doorway and grabbing Connolly, I pulled him after me through the hole. His leg got broken again, but there was no help for it. As soon as we left the room, the Zulus were in there with furious cries of disappointment and rage. Now there was a repetition of the work. Again I had to drag Connolly through, a terrible task because he was a very heavy man." Alphonse de Neuville's painting of the battle, based on eyewitness accounts, depicts several events occurring at once, including Private Henry Hook VC carrying Private John Connolly on his back away from the burning hospital. When John Connolly left the army, he moved to Swansea and married Catherine Crowley at Swansea, September 1885. The 1901 census for Swansea shows him living with his wife, Catherine Connolly, née Crowley, their 4 children, all living at 35 Llangyfelach Street, Swansea. A 1906 newspaper reporting on the death of John Connolly said, "Poor Connolly was invalided home with a broken knee, and death has only now released him from almost constant suffering since that time. Rheumatic fever set in, complications ensued, and dropsy ended him." When our reporter visited him, he found the sufferer full of his old-time grit. The sunlight streamed through the little window across the bed on which he lay. John Connolly said in humorous sadness, "If the world frowns on me, the sun shines." Private John Connolly was buried in an unmarked pauper's grave, but with full military honours, at 3 p.m. on Saturday the 10th of November 1906. His grave at Dannegraig Cemetery is today still unmarked. Like his fellow soldiers, Private Connolly defended Rorke's Drift with great courage and should not be forgotten.